Welcome to Property Power Talks, the exclusive podcast for NB Property Law. I'm your host, Kaylee Swift, and each episode will dive into cutting-edge insights on property law, probate, estate planning strategies, and seamless estate administration. Whether you're a property investor, homeowner, industry professional, planning your estate, or wanting to understand how estate administrations work, then our expert discussions will empower you with the knowledge you need to navigate the complexities of property and estate planning law with confidence. Let's unlock the power of property and estate planning law together.
My name is Louise, and I am the lawyer at No Borders Property Law. We're doing the selling success, preparing your home and navigating key changes in property law. And the co-host is Christina Penrose from Penrose Real Estate, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Good morning. Nice to meet everybody. I'm Christina Penrose from Penrose Real Estate, and I work with my husband, Grant. We have a boutique business and have been selling for over 30 years, and I have lived in Brisbane for all my life, so still excited about real estate 30 years later.
Okay.
Today, I'll run through some of the things that you'll need to know in terms of preparing your home for sale. We'll cover off on some of the legislation requirements that people often forget when they're preparing their home for sale, how to think about selling when you've got a tenant in place, the gardens and lawns, what might be required there. And we'll discuss things like the repairs and improvements, whether to sell vacant or furnished, and other tips that may be useful in this process. So we'll start with tenanted properties. So if you've got a tenant in your property and you're thinking about selling it, then there's a number of things that you need to consider. And one of them is the type of lease that you have the tenant on. It's usually more attractive for someone to have a fixed term lease due to the limited prescribed grounds for ending periodic tenancies now. And so something to consider is if you gave the tenant notice because you decided to sell the property vacant, then you would need to note that it's for the sale process. If you decided not to sell and wanted to put it back on the rental market, if it's less than 6 months' time from when you first gave them that notice, then there's possible fines and repercussions for you. So it's really important to think about whether you keep your property on a fixed term lease or periodic tenancy. When you've got fixed term lease, they're going to be asking whether you've issued a notice to leave at the end of that tenancy so that there could be vacant possession for them. And they're going to want to know that the alarms are all interconnecting and that they are up to the current legislative requirements. So these are all things that obviously you need to decide. But one of the big things is whether or not the tenant's going to cooperate and how well the property is presented for sale. So it might be worth waiting and having the tenant move out if the tenant's going to be difficult or if they're going to poorly present your property, because you want it to look good online and you want it to look good when people come through. And tenants can literally refuse to have photographs of their belongings, and they can refuse open homes and they can refuse auctions on site. So if you're considering any of those things, then obviously a difficult tenant is not going to help you get the most number of people through the property, and it's not going to help you get the best price at the end of the day. Repair orders, if there's any repair orders that apply to the property, then they will continue to apply to the new purchaser. So it could be off-putting. So if you have something like that, then it's definitely worth trying to remedy that prior to going to market. And now with the new contracts, we need to also disclose when the last rent increase date was, because we can only increase the rent every 12 months. So this is important because if you've got a friend or a tenant that's been in there for years and you've given them a much cheaper rent, then that can ultimately impact then on the sale price for the property. Because if you've got your mate in there renting it at $300 a week, but really it's worth $600, but they can't increase the rent for another 10 months, then it can impact on their financing ability and what they'll pay for the property. The other thing to consider is first home buyers. If you think the property would appeal to first home buyers, then you'll find that if the lease term is longer than 6 months, that most of the first home buyers won't consider it because it has impacts on their grants and things that are available for them. So best to be selling a property that is tenanted in that last 6 months of the tenancy if you think that first home buyers are part of the market for the property. Otherwise, you really are reducing the number of buyers that will come through and that potentially will be buyers for the properties. So one of the often forgotten items when you're preparing to get your house ready for sale is the lawns and the gardens. So what we recommend to people is if you're thinking about selling your home, to go across the street and stand there and look at the property and think about how it's going to present first impressions to your purchaser. And so lawns and gardens are very important in that. And as you know, it's very difficult to overnight transform the garden. We can certainly get people in, landscapers, and plant new plants and do things, but it's nothing like a beautifully established garden that is in play, and that will help to add value to property. So again, it depends on the kind of property that you're looking to sell. If you're looking to sell a renovator, then the gardens may not be so important. But if you're looking at a home that's, you know, an acreage or something like that, you can't just transform and replace all the grass and do things quickly to necessarily get it on the market. So it's good to allow yourself some lead time and work on those kind of things in advance. Obviously, mulching the gardens can be done last minute, but it's worth thinking ahead about how you want the property to look when you go to market. We recommend, again, it depends on the property that you're selling. If you're selling a renovator, a true renovator, then it may not be worth fixing anything when you go to market. Just do your compliance matters, pool fencing and the smoke alarms. But other than that, you might just leave the property and let it go to market as a renovator. We have sold some incredibly rundown properties, you know, even without front steps, things like that. And they have done exceptionally well because the potential that you're selling really does seem to appeal to the wider audience. But if you've got a property that is in generally going to appeal to a first home buyer, or it's in pretty good condition, then it's definitely worth making sure that all the appliances and the equipment and the property are working, making sure that the lights are working. So, for example, when you use dusk photography, or if we do evening opens, as we often do, so people can come after work, making sure that all the exterior lights and things are working and the down lights will impact on your photography and obviously when people are coming through the property. So it's worth making sure that they're all working and ready to go. Check your gutters, you know, all the things that might come into play in a building inspection, and try and minimize the list of things that would appear for your purchaser on that building report. Now, if you've got lots of time, if you've got, you know, a year or two before you're planning to go to market, it's worth getting a building inspection 12 months out and then just working your way through the various items that they may have brought up for you. What you don't want to do is find you're going to market, do a building inspection last minute and find out you've got termites, and then, you know, you have got all that time you need to get that resolved prior to going on the market. So definitely worth looking at that. Again, it depends on the property, how far you'll want to go. If you know there's a couple of boards on the deck that need doing, get it done, because when it comes to the building and pest inspection, a lot of the buyers try to use that as a negotiation tool and try and get the price down. So it can either be off-putting if there's a huge list of things, even if they're minor, because what happens with the building and pest inspectors, they've got to protect themselves. So by the time it goes on paper, it doesn't sound good. So it's much better to try and minimize what's going to appear on that report, and that will help you to get the best price. The other thing is, you know, when we're selling, we try and get the buyer to come to that building inspection at the end of the inspection so that they can be shown the various things that are wrong with the property, because, as I say, it does sound worse on paper. And it can also be off-putting to people. They think, oh, there's a lot of work to be done on the property. I really don't have time, or the trade's available, and they'll move on to other properties. So definitely this one is a big one. And of course, if you're a believer in feng shui, that's really an important part. Everything working, nothing leaking, is a really important part of the feng shui of the property. Some other things you might want to consider, particularly if you've got plenty of time, is what improvements you could make to the property that will enhance your price. And this is a common one. We get asked to just come around, give people an idea, should I do this, should I not? And we're really happy to do that, because what we don't want to see is you spending a lot of money on something that's not going to get you the value back. For example, you know, kitchens. So it depends on all of what the rest of the property is like, but you certainly wouldn't just replace a kitchen usually if you're planning to go to market next month and expect to make money on that. So it's, you know, big things like that, it's definitely worth having a look at and having a chat to us about whether it's going to be of benefit to you or not, or whether you better to just get a quote to do that. Painting is something that's usually relatively inexpensive, and some people can do themselves, that will enhance the property and make a big change. Particularly things like if the property's got lots of feature walls, or it's painted relatively dark colour, then we tend to find lightening up the paintwork will make the rooms look bigger and will create that light, airy feel that we're hoping to do. But again, it's worth checking, because if you decide that you wanted to style the property, then some of the painting may not actually be required. So even though there might be a few marks on the walls, once we style it and put particular artworks in, we may be able to make that less obvious to your purchasers and save you some money there. So, you know, these are different things to consider. If you're not going to style the property, or it's not going to be furnished, then perhaps the painting is even more important. Fencing, again, things like that. In this particular example photo that I've got here, and I'll talk more about the property later, the top photo is when it was first taken to market with another agent, and the pool fencing was not compliant. So when we were asked to help them try and sell it, we had that issue removed so that it was no longer an objection and something a buyer would need to deal with. And we put a really nice fence down the right hand side there, and obviously re-photographed it in a more attractive angle. So things like that can be worth doing. House washing is another one. So, you know, washing down the outside of the house, making sure that it looks clean and fresh. Even though you haven't repainted it, if you've washed down the outside of the house, it can look so much better. Particularly driveways and pathways, you know, pressure cleaning, all of those is a big benefit to sort of owner-occupied type properties. You may even consider getting a bond clean prior to going to market, or at least, you know, getting all the windows cleaned so that when they're looking out, it's a really nice clean view from there. So here's an example photograph. The property on the left, you can see that we repainted the gutters and the fence, and obviously took different photos, but we've also improved the gardens quite quickly in that particular scenario. We just got gardeners in and and did it very quickly. But you can see that that has made a big difference to how the property looks when you turn up and how the property looks online, which is where all your inquiry is coming to. So we often say that you're in a beauty contest and a price war. So you really want to make sure your property is appealing and will look the best when it goes to market and when you have the photography taken. You could take the photos just from the camera, but when you get up a little bit higher, which is not expensive to do, then it makes such a big difference to the angle. But that fence, which was quite ugly initially, it's not even in the left photo, but the fence was quite ugly, but once painted, it really looked smart, and it was such a big part of the property when you drove by. So you've got to think about the fact that your buyers will look online and then drive by. So you want to make sure that the property looks as good as it can. You know, things like even just putting pot plants near the front, you know, near the garages or near the front door, or, you know, little things like that, just to make it look better in that first impression or that drive-by inspection. So furnished or unfurnished is often a big question for owners when they're deciding what to do with the property. And generally speaking, I would say that furnished will create more of a warm feeling and maybe more appealing, and definitely online, if you look at photos which have furniture and don't, generally speaking, the furnished photo will look more appealing. So you can see the difference here in the two rooms. Obviously on a big photo on a big screen, that makes quite a difference to how it looks, and it makes it easy for the buyers to work out where their furniture can fit and what sort of furniture would fit in the property. Not all owners want to spend the money on furnishing the property if it's already vacant, and in some cases it might not be necessary. For example, if it's freshly painted, it's got brand new carpets, everything looks clean and fresh, well, then you may not choose to furnish the property. Or if the budget just doesn't allow it, you may not wish to do so. But virtual furniture is really inexpensive in comparison and can be added to any photo. So you can see here the massive difference that it looks online to attract the buyers to get them to the property. So, you know, the biggest thing is getting them to the property, and then hopefully the property delivers its own. But those photos and how it's presented online are so important. So this is something we do for quite a lot of properties, because the photos of the lounge room, the bedrooms, they probably all look a bit the same when it's empty like this. And so by furnishing them, they won't look the same, and they will look more appealing and also show, you know, what can fit in the rooms.
Virtual furniture staging has definitely improved. I remember when they did it when we bought our house 10 years ago.
It looks really good. And we have an impact in the choices. Like we can choose certain styles of furniture and things to match the property when we do that. So styling is a big one. And so, you know, you can style the whole property. But if you're living in it and you've already got furniture, then you might just do what we call a partial style. And we get the stylist in and help to walk through each room and make sure that each room really presents at its absolute best. So this particular property, you've got a before and after photo. The obvious change there is the red couch is gone, and you've got a lighter coloured couch there to make it look bigger. But also you can see we've gone for a glass coffee table, again, make the room look bigger versus the heavier wooden furniture that was in that first photo. So this particular property, and it's the same one where we did the pool fencing compliance, we sold it a few years ago, so the prices are not reflective of the value today, but we took it over after a property had been on the market for 120 days. They had a maximum offer of 1.2. We spent about 10,000 styling, using the existing furniture where possible and fixing the things on the deck and so on that needed repairs, and getting that pool fencing compliance. We spent about 10,000, and then we were able to sell it within 2 weeks for 1,360. So you can see that $10,000 investment for this particular client returned them $160,000. So often, you don't get the opportunity to have proof that it worked and that it got extra money because you do it and then you sell it and that's done. But in this particular scenario, you could see categorically that made that client, along with the change of agent, but that made that client a lot of money just doing those few things to prepare the property better and make it look better both online and then when you walk through the property. Here again, photography. So we do take over quite a few properties where the property didn't sell and then they change the agent and ask us to look after it. So one of the things we always try and do is to make the property look vastly different to however it was marketed previously. So here in this particular case, you can see the photo on the left, obviously taken in the daytime. The photo on the right, nighttime, looks vastly different and more upmarket, I would say, and again help to get that extra price. Again, once it comes down to the photography, the styling is important, but photography angles and lighting and so on are really, really important. So when you're looking and thinking about selling the property, then think about where the best photos might come from, or have a look online, see the quality of the photos of the agents that you're considering using. This particular property, the view was the selling feature. So every photo was orientated like this one to the view. So you can see now that the kitchen has got that view all the way around, whereas the photo previously used was all about the kitchen. So it really gave you the feel of the vista that was available for the property. So another thing that you can do when you're preparing to sell is to start to collect all of the information and the value propositions for the property. So collecting the documents that you have and getting them ready so that when you appoint your agent, you can give them all of the information about the property. And I say this because what happens is we ask you and we walk through, and obviously we take note of different things, but a lot of things can be forgotten in that first initial meeting. For example, is the property insulated? Nobody can see that, but that's of value. So that should be passed on to the buyer. And the best way we found to do that is to actually prepare a fact sheet so that we've got all of the information to give to the buyer. And not everyone's going to look at it, but if they're looking to buy your property, they will read everything about it. And that can help you to get extra value for the property. So things like if you've got the original plans for the property, the council approvals is a big one, making sure that everything's council approved, that you plan to have approved, and that you're clear and you've got the final approvals available to prove that the property has been approved. All of those kind of things, copies of the insurance, the rates, the body corporate documents, all of those kind of things. Start to collect them now in a drawer or something so that when the time comes, or in a file on your computer, whatever works for you, so that when the time comes to sell, you've got the list of all of the benefits. Think about it when you're out there on the deck and you see the kookaburras come in. Make a note. Kookaburras come in on the deck, have all of those kind of things there so that the agent can use them in their marketing of the property to create the appeal, and then they can use them in protecting your price to get the best possible price for the property. So, thinking about it over time is actually helpful, and you'll remember things like it's got a watering system, or whatever it is about your property that you like or is of benefit should be documented so that the agent can then use that to really help you get the best possible price. So we touched on legislative requirements and Louise is going to go into a lot more detail because there's going to be a lot more coming. But the ones that seem to catch people out currently are the pool safety certificate. So you might have a pool you put in 10 years ago. The fencing was obviously compliant then. It looks fine, it works, and you think automatically that you're going to be compliant. You need to provide a pool safety certificate, and they're only valid for 2 years. And whilst the rental properties, you should already have one in place for that. If you're selling your home that you're living in, you may not have one. And it can take, the inspectors are quite busy. It can take them a while to come out. And then if there's something that needs doing, it can take them quite a long time to come back, depending on who you choose. So, you know, we've got a few people we can pull a few strings with and get it done relatively quickly. But this is often one of the slower things for us to do in terms of preparing the house for sale. And even though you had the pool put in 10 years ago and it was compliant then, the requirements continue to change. And so it's not uncommon for them to add extra things that you now need to do, which will probably ruin the look of the pool. They want, you know, all sorts of crazy things now, but, you know, you've still got to run by that and you need to have it done. So do allow for that. And that's one of the things you can do early that gets that out of the way, and then you'll have it valid for 2 years from there. The other thing is the smoke alarms, and this is a big one from a budget point of view. People don't expect or necessarily know about. In January 22, it came into play that you needed interconnecting smoke alarms, and they needed to be in every bedroom in the house as well as on every level. So it's quite common that people haven't done this upgrade in their own home, and it can be quite expensive if you've got a big home to get that done. So it's definitely something to remember and to try and get done earlier. We can always just get them checked prior to going to market or prior to settlement, but having that big change of one in every bedroom is definitely worth doing and budgeting for if you don't organise it prior, because it is the option for the buyer to claim 0.15% of the purchase price on or before settlement. Is that right, Louise?
Yes, that is generally a lot more than $1,000. Just because of the prices of houses these days, it well exceeds what it would cost to do it yourself.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that catches people out last minute. They didn't plan to spend another $1,000 or $1,200 or $600. So definitely worth you knowing and noting. So in summary, I think one of the best things that you can do in terms of presenting your home for sale is start at the front, work your way through room by room. We do have checklists available of things to work on so that you can work your way through the property, and start packing now. So what I say to people is you don't want to have all of the things on the kitchen benches and stuff that you might normally. You don't want to have all of the magnets on the fridge, you know, all of those kind of things. You don't want your personal photos when we're coming through. All of those things should be removed. We don't want the property completely stuck either, but you know, definitely start the process of decluttering, and I would recommend get the boxes out and just start. It will make the process a lot easier later, even if you have to store the boxes in the garage. You know, that's better than having all of the shelves chockers with bits and pieces we've collected over the years. You can do the same thing with the linen cupboard and so on, because most people will come along and open the odd cupboard. Linen cupboard's probably the most common. So we don't want everything falling out of the cupboards when they do so. We want it to look like the property has plenty of storage and has the capability to fit everything that they will want in there. So definitely start packing gradually, makes your life a lot easier. We hope that today has been of value.
Thank you so much for that, Christina. All right, let's go in and talk about the new disclosure requirements. I'm sure everyone's been hearing about it. We're in the property law section have been talking about it for quite some time, and The bill passed in 2023 and it still hasn't commenced, but we have a date now. So from the 1st of August, the sellers are going to be required to provide a disclosure statement and certificates to the prospective buyer. So this is similar to what they do in other states in Queensland. It's got to be in the prescribed form. It can be done electronically or physically, and it can be prepared by the seller or the agent, but it has to be provided to the buyer before the contract is signed. It's to collate the information that mostly they're already requiring to disclose or warrant, and hopefully it means that it will make it easier for buyers to understand and sellers to ensure that the warranties they're giving in the contract are correct. So it's been broken up into 6 parts. The first part is just the property details, and part 2 is going to be title details, encumbrances, and then the tenancy and rooming accommodation agreement details. So now the seller's going to have to provide a copy of the title search and a copy of the plan, and then they provide the details of any unregistered encumbrances. So this includes, generally the most obvious would be a lease, because they're not registered on title for residential leases unless you've got a lease over 3 years, so your defence housing ones style things. They also need to include statutory encumbrances. So this will include your manhole covers and your sewerage lines, and you should provide plans if they're available, which can generally be, you can generally get them from Dial Before You Dig. And then you also need to provide details relating to the residential tenancy and rooming accommodation agreements. This will include details of the current tenancy agreements that will continue after settlement. Also, advice if it's been subject to a tenancy agreement in the last 12 months, when the last increase was. So you know how Christina mentioned you can only do it once in every 12 months. As a seller, you need to make sure that you're letting the buyers know when it was done, and you've got to provide evidence if requested by the buyer. This doesn't include short-term letting or holiday letting, because they don't actually fall under the definition of residential tenancies and are not covered by the Act. And then part 3, the land use. So you're going needing to provide the zoning of the property, any notices you've received about proposed resumptions, or if there's going to be any infrastructure proposals. If the property is on the environmental protection, the environmental management register, or the contaminated land register. And then if there's a tree or order or neighbourhood dispute application. All of these are already covered in the contract. They're just within warranties. So it just makes it easier for those buyers to know that information. And then once again, if there's a pool and if there's a compliance certificate issued, and if any building work's been carried out by an owner builder. So it doesn't matter if it's been done by a registered builder, you don't need to disclose it. It's only if it's done by an owner builder, and if there's any show cause notices issued by the government. And then they also need to provide the rates and water charges. I haven't been able to confirm if they've got to provide certificates similar to they do in New South Wales and Victoria, where you order them from the council and then you attach it, or if just filling out the information is going to be sufficient. I think most people will probably order searches, but yeah, I'm not sure if you'll need to. And then if it is part of a body corporate, you're going to need to provide the community management statement. Some of us will remember when they tried to do this before, where we had to provide the community management statement. I think it lasted maybe 12 months. I don't think it was but it's coming back. So that will be enough. These are all going to cost the seller. So they're going to have to order these searches. They're going to have to get this information. Sellers don't have a copy of the community management statement. So this is one thing that people are going to have to budget when they sell. So what searches are you going to have to order to comply with this? I'm assuming they're going to have a setup where you click a button and say, I need the disclosure searches. But is that going to be...
Sorry, Louise, we currently get the searches done with the CMS and disclosure statements and minutes and things through a company. It's $195, I think is currently the cost for that.
Yeah, most agents don't.
Okay.
As the lawyer, I love it when they do, but you'll be surprised at how few do that.
Right, okay.
Yes. So that's it. Is it going to be the agents actually going to be able to order them and get organised like Christina is, or are they going to be pushing it off to their solicitor to do it? Hopefully, I mean, from my point of view, hopefully the solicitor gets to do it, but I think they'll have a system in place to allow it to be ordered, but we'll see. And this is the thing that's surprising. What doesn't have to be disclosed? Number one, flooding. I think a lot of people thought that was going to be a requirement, but it's not. It's the buyer is still going to have to do their checks and check their maps and all of that sort of stuff. There doesn't need any notification if it's been affected by pests or if there's been termites in the property. We're not confirming if it's been structurally sound. So you'll still need to do your building and pest. And also usage. We don't need to disclose what it was historically used for or any of the approvals. The other thing is asbestos. We're finding a lot of people are concerned about asbestos recently.
Often ask us.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably been in the last 5 years that it's suddenly come up on people's radar and they go, does this property have asbestos? And I go, don't know. So they're not going to need to disclose that. And they're not also disclosing anything about it being in koala habitats or if there's any other vegetation restrictions. All right. So that's probably just the general gist of what's going to be in the disclosure. The government has issued the prescribed forms now, so we can start looking at them and work out exactly what they're going to need to do. They haven't provided the new REIQ contracts, or that I could find anyway. I'm not sure if you're getting any notices, Christina?
No, they automatically update for us when the new ones come out, and I think that's so that we don't use the new ones before we should and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I'm not sure what they're going to be removing from the schedule, or if they're just going to require us to duplicate it and have the information in the schedule plus in the disclosure.
Let's hope it's not duplication.
Yeah, that's what we hope, but I don't have high hopes.
It'll be another document, is my guess.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we've had a recent change to the capital gains withholding. So back in 2016, the federal government introduced requirement for foreign residents to have their capital gains withheld. The purpose was to ensure that foreign residents are meeting their obligations to pay withholding tax, to pay capital gains when they sell. And the purpose was to include a mechanism so that the ATO gets paid without actually doing very much. But so they do it as part of it was originally set at 2 million, then it dropped down pretty quickly to 750,000, that anyone selling over 750,000 needed to have a certificate. From the 1st of January, it applies to everything. If you're selling property, you've got to have this certificate. And if you don't, the buyer has to withhold 15% of the purchase price and pay it to the ATO on settlement. And then when you go to do your tax return, that's when they'll work out exactly how much it is that you have to get back and that sort of stuff. Who does it apply to? Everybody. Every seller and buyer of a taxable Australian property, regardless of their residence or not, has to apply to either pay it or get an exemption. It includes vacant land, residential, commercial properties, leases, mining, everything that they can think of that would attract capital gains. So do you have to pay it? If you're an Australian resident for tax purposes, you don't need to. You can get a clearance certificate. They say 28 days. It normally takes a couple of days, but it's better to have it early in the process because it lasts for 12 months. So you can have it sitting there ready to go. You can apply for it before you actually put your property on the market so you know what it's going to be. And it includes if the property is owned by a company or trust, they still need to do the application as well. And if you're not an Australian resident for tax purposes, you can apply for a withholding, variation to the withholding to reduce how much is going to be done. But if you are unable to obtain a variation or a clearance, the buyer has to pay it on settlement. There's a 4-part test about whether you're an Australian resident for tax purposes. It will depend on, I think they call it the residence test, the 183-day test, the Commonwealth separation test. But pretty much, if you pay tax in Australia, you're probably a resident for tax purposes, but check with your accountant. All right. So the other thing that needs to be taken into consideration when you come to settlement is your settlement adjustments. So what are you going to actually receive on settlement once you've sold your property? Obviously, you get your purchase price less your deposit. But what about all of those outgoings that you've already paid or get paid later? So your rates and your water. So what is adjusted? Anything that is attached to the property. So rates, water, body corporate levies, sometimes land tax, generally not, but sometimes. And then anything that isn't attached to your property personally, anything that's attached to you personally isn't adjusted. So we don't adjust for your electricity accounts. That's up to the energy companies. And how do we calculate it? We calculate it by doing a less adjustment for anything that's going to be paid after settlement. So for your water bills, the buyer pays you that amount less so that when they receive the bill, they pay it with rates, or anything you've paid in advance. We do it so that the buyer is paying you more. So you'll receive that. It's done on a pro rata basis. So for a simple one, if you've got, for this current period, it's a 90-day quarter. So if you own it for the 60 days, you pay for 60 days, the buyer pays for 30 days. So, and it's important that if you're getting close to settlement, so within a week of settlement, and you pay one of your bills, let people know, because it takes a couple days for the authorities to update their system to show that it is paid. And the solicitors are generally checking a couple days before settlement to see what still needs to be paid. And so you want to make sure we don't end up paying it twice. You will get it refunded, but it takes time. And then the other major thing that you need to be aware of for when you sell on the legal side of things is your mortgage release. So obviously, most people have a mortgage. It's registered on title, and we need to get the bank to confirm we can transfer the property and get that mortgage released. Even if you've paid off your loan, chances are your mortgage is still registered on title, because it costs money and banks don't want to remove it. So if you've paid out your loan, you either ask for it to be released at that time, follow it up, or make sure you've kept details of who your bank was with, what account you've had, so that when you do go to sell, you don't have to go, oh, actually, do I still have a mortgage on title? Because that takes longer. Generally, it takes 10 to 15 business days for the banks to process a release. But once your loan's been paid out and the bank's not really receiving any money, it can take a lot longer. One of the first things you need to do once you've got a contract is notify your bank. Don't leave that until it's unconditional. Don't say, well, maybe this one won't go through, so I shouldn't let the bank know. Let them know. They're not going to force you to settle and pay them out. They will just start processing it, and they hold it for 3 months. So even if that first contract falls through or the buyer pulls out, you've still got them on notice that you're selling and you want them to prepare documents. The bank will have a discharge form or a release of mortgage form. Fill it out, put your details, put your solicitor's details on there. And then, because until the bank gets that form signed with the solicitor's details, they won't talk to anybody but you. And then, so on settlement, in exchange for paying out your loan, the bank will provide the mortgage and mortgage release, which will then be registered on title. But the final payout figure is more likely to be different than your loan amount. or what's showing outstanding on your bank account, because they will have additional interest. So it's important to make sure while you're working out how much you're going to have on settlement, especially if you have not, if you're going to be close to how much is outstanding and at what the sale price is going to be, which at the moment with prices is less likely, but it does happen where there's not as much capital gains in the property. You need to make sure that you're taking into consideration the interest that's going to be charged, the adjustments, any of the outstanding bills, and the foreign withholding tax if you think you might have to apply for it, the smoke alarms fee if you've not got compliant smoke alarms. All of these things will reduce how much is actually available on settlement. And that's really the gist of what we've got going on in the near future and what you need to think about when you're selling your property. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that presentation. And obviously, if you've got any questions in regards to selling your property on the real estate side of things, or any legal questions, or any questions about the upcoming changes and how to incorporate this moving forward, feel free to reach out to Christina or myself, Louise.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Property Power Talks. We hope you found today's insights valuable and engaging. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. For more information or to connect with our expert team at NB Property Law, then please visit our website at noborderslawgroup.com.au. We look forward to having you join us next time for more expert advice and actionable strategies to master the world of property law. Until then, stay informed and stay empowered.